Most of us see divorce as a failure. Society tells us this, our communities and families say the same, and that's why many are so scared to break free. But what if I told you that holding on to something that's dragging us down isn't really being brave at all? It's actually feeling trapped. So today, let's talk about what self-divorce is and how it's really the answer to true freedom. Hi, my name is Aubrey, and for years I was part of a religious cult. And that's why I'm so passionate about mental freedom and living your truth. So what is self-divorce? Well, I tell this story that I've been divorced 5 times, right? 5 times and counting. The first divorce is actually my marital separation from my ex-husband, who at the time when we got married, we did believe that we were going to be together forever, even though we were in an unfulfilled relationship. But why is it so difficult for us to let go of relationships even though it's unhealthy for us? Well, stick around because I'll explain that later. The second divorce was actually right before the pandemic, and I was actually separating myself from the mind-controlling religion that I was part of for a very long time. It was super difficult for me because that also meant that I had to leave behind the most intimate relationships that I've ever formed. Like, I had history with these people. I had, that was the only community that I've ever known since I was a preteen. So you can just imagine how difficult that was, how difficult, leaving something behind that intimate, but at the same time, that relationship wasn't supportive. The relationship was based on conditions. Yeah, I mean, sadly, that's just what happens when you're involved in conditional relationships, or in a cult like that, where if you choose to leave the pack, it's all or nothing. And at that point, that was the first time I believe that I finally just chose myself, even though I didn't know myself. Very risky, but it was just something I felt that I needed to explore, and I never looked back. And because I was knocking off so many layers already, right? So it was my marital separation, and then it was the cult, and then it was like the most intimate relationships. The more I knocked off, the more mental freedom I started to have. Isn't that interesting? Like the more I started to actually reconnect with who I am. And everything started to become a little bit more clear in terms of like where I wanted to go. Even though I didn't have a clear direction, things just started to feel more in alignment. And so the next divorce was actually breaking free from my corporate job, which was also very difficult. Now I'm just continuing to really trying to break free from any limiting mindset that I may have, such as scarcity mindset or fear of failure. So those are the things that I'm trying to navigate and break free from. So divorce is not just marital separation, but these were things that were pushing my authenticity down. I felt like I was expanding in these relationships, but the box was too small, and I felt trapped. You see, to get to where I am right now, I had to go through a series of purposeful, difficult divorces. It's not easy leaving intimate people behind, but if they're not allowing you to grow and it's unhealthy for you, then it's time to make changes in your life. It's the first divorce that's the hardest, but you'll start noticing that every divorce actually leads to more freedom, a little bit more freedom each time, because you start noticing who you really are, the confidence and courage that you actually have. You start setting more boundaries because you have more self-respect, and we start to feel more empowered to be unapologetically ourselves. And it didn't happen all at once, right? It was a span of a few years, but every divorce was like peeling off a layer so I can finally get to my authentic self. So I'm not saying that you should get a divorce or quit that job, because maybe it's working out for you, and that's great. That's awesome. But the goal here is really just to identify areas in your life where there's fear to be free, where there's fear to be yourself. But why is it so difficult to let go of relationships, even though it's not healthy for us? Well, growing up, when it comes to divorce, many of us are really taught that it's normal to stay in unhappy relationships, right? Because everyone else does it. We see it in the media, we see it amongst our friends and even our loved ones. So it's not just what we see, but it's also what we hear. When we hear the word divorce, well, culturally and historically, Most people associate that with failure and probably weakness. But it's also a feeling, and that feeling keeps us stuck because we are comfortable. We feel comfortable, and that's also another reason why we cannot let go of these relationships. And it's not entirely your fault. It's because our brain is literally wired to seek safety and to stay with what's familiar, even if it's not healthy for us. So our brain is literally wired for surviving, not thriving. But what happens when this natural instinct keeps us in a comfortable relationship but is not fulfilling? Well, sometimes we become so comfortable that we actually start to lose sight of who we truly are. And this was so true for me. You see, I didn't even realize, because I was comfortable, that staying safe and being in my comfort zone and trying to be secure was actually keeping me from living my truth. I then started to recognize that comfort zone is danger zone, and that there is no growth being comfortable all the time. Once I was aware of it, I really needed to have self-action. I needed to decide, how am I going to strategize and break free? Because it's really when we start daring ourselves to start taking those first steps, no matter how small, no matter how cautious, towards our freedom. We need to start seeing divorce as something that can actually be good for us, and sometimes even necessary to break free or leave behind relationships. And I get it, you might probably start feeling fear, and fear is so paralyzing. But we have to recognize that this is something that we have to embrace, because this is what positive transformation feels like. And this is why I created the next video for you, because I share how I was able to turn my fears into my advantage. So always remember, my friends, to own your story, own your power, and live your truth. I'll see you